The soil in the old Blackwood section of the cemetery is dense and sour, packed tight against the roots of oaks that have stood watch since the Civil War. It is heavy work, the kind that settles in your lower back and stays there, a dull ache that no amount of stretching can shake. We had been digging for 3 hours by the time the wood of the coffin gave way, splintering under the iron tip of the pry bar. It was a bad night to be out of low clouds, no moon, the kind of wet cold that feels like a hand pressing down on your neck, but the market for antique Victorian jewelry was paying out triple, and rent was due. You get used to the sounds of the grave after a while. The squelch of mud, the grate of the shovel, the rhythmic thud of earth hitting the tarp. It becomes a trance. You stop thinking about the man or woman beneath your feet. They become just another obstacle, a jar in the pantry that you need to open. But sometimes, the silence gets loud enough to make you hum to yourself, just to prove you still exist. When the lid finally cracked, the smell wasn't the sweet rot of decay we expected. It was chemical. Acrid. It smelled like old darkrooms in vinegar. I aimed my flashlight down, the beam cutting through the dust motes dancing in the stale air. Inside, alongside the desiccated remains of whatever poor soul had been interred in 1924, there was a box. Leather-bound, brass-clasped, perfectly preserved. I wasn't interested in the corpse. I was interested in the bag at its feet. I reached in, my gloves scraping against bone, and lifted the camera out. It was a bellows model, an old folding plate camera, heavy as a brick. The leather was still supple. The lens glass stared back at me like a cyclopean eye, catching the light of my torch and throwing a distorted reflection back at my own face. It shouldn't have been working. The moisture alone should have rusted the shutter into a solid block of iron. But as I turned it over in my hands, I felt a resistance. The winding lever was stiff, but it moved. A click, sharp and mechanical, echoed in the confined space of the grave. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was just the absurdity of finding technology in a place of eternal rest. I pressed the shutter release. Snap. The sound was violent in the quiet. My partner, Miller, froze. He looked down at me, his face pale and smeared with dirt. The hell was that? Camera, I said, my voice sounding hollow. It's loaded. I opened the back. The film holder was inside, a sliding wooden cartridge. I pulled it out. The plate wasn't glass, it was a sheet of flexible, translucent plastic, curled slightly at the edges. It smelled of silver and formaldehyde. I held it up to the beam of the flashlight. It was dark, almost black, but there, in the center, a faint, ghostly rectangle of exposure. Just take the jewelry and let's go, Miller whispered. He was looking at the tree line, jumpy. He said the wind had stopped blowing. I hadn't noticed. We packed up. We took the gold ring, the silver brooch, and the camera. We left the body. We filled the hole and drove back to the apartment in silence, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the drizzle. I am a photographer by trade, or I was, before the debts caught up with me. I have a darkroom set up in the bathroom. It's the only room in the house that feels safe, the red light casting long bloody shadows against the tiles. That night, while Miller sat in the living room smoking cigarettes with the shaking hand of a man who knows he has done something wrong, I locked the bathroom door. I developed the plate. The developer solution is supposed to be cold. I keep the bottles in the fridge. But when I poured the liquid over the plastic sheet in the tray, the solution hissed. It steamed. It wasn't cold. It was boiling hot. The image began to rise almost instantly, faster than chemistry should allow. It wasn't a negative. It was a positive image, stark and blindingly white, burning onto the surface like a brand. I lifted it out with tongs. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird. The photo was of me. But it wasn't me holding the camera. It was me, standing in the grave, but the grave was open. The sky above me wasn't clouded, it was a twisting vortex of impossible colors, bruised purples and sickly greens. And I wasn't alone in the hole. There were hands. Dozens of them, pale and skeletal, reaching up from the darkness below the coffin, gripping my ankles, my calves, pulling me down. My face in the photo was contorted in a scream I didn't remember making. And behind me, standing on the edge of the grave, looking down, was Miller. But Miller wasn't watching me. He was holding the camera, taking the picture. I dropped the tongs. The plastic sheet curled, as if trying to touch my fingers. I looked at the camera sitting on the sink counter. The red safe light glinted off the brass lens. The shutter was open. The bellows were extended, pointing directly at me. I hadn't taken the picture in the grave. I had been the subject. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. I needed to destroy it. I reached for the camera to smash it against the porcelain sink, but my hand stopped. The lens. Inside the glass, deep in the reflection, I saw movement. It wasn't reflecting the bathroom. It was reflecting the grave. And the grave was empty. The body was gone. The coffin was splintered. And in the reflection of the lens, I saw a figure standing in the dirt. It was tall, emaciated, wearing a burial suit that had rotted away at the sleeves. It was holding a camera. And it was winding the lever. Click. The sound came from the lens, not the room. I grabbed a towel, threw it over the camera, and shoved it into the bottom of the hamper, burying it under dirty laundry. I washed my hands 3 times. The smell of formaldehyde wouldn't leave my nose. It was in my hair, in my clothes. I walked out into the living room. Miller was sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. The static was silent, the volume turned all the way down. "You took it," Miller said. He didn't turn around. His voice was flat, devoid of the tremor it had had at the cemetery. "What?" I asked. I stood near the door, my keys in my hand. "The picture," he said. "In the hole. You took the picture." I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my spine. "Miller, I developed it. It wasn't me. It was you in the photo. You were holding the camera." He turned his head slowly. The movement was jerky, like a marionette. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown so wide they swallowed the irises. They were black. Reflective. "I didn't take it," he whispered. "I was watching. I was watching you pull it out of the bag. But you weren't looking at the camera. You were looking at the camera. Like you were listening to it." I looked at the coffee table. There was a fresh photograph sitting there, developing on the wood, the chemical smell filling the room. I walked over, my legs feeling like lead. It was a picture of Miller sitting on the couch. But behind him, standing in the hallway, was a shape. A man-shaped hole in the darkness, holding a camera to its face. The man in the photo was me. "It wants to show us something," Miller said. He stood up. His joints popped loudly, the sound of dry branches snapping. "It says we're in the exposure." I ran. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't grab the camera. I just opened the door and ran into the night. I didn't stop until I reached a motel 3 towns over.